Hey, John.
Oh, hello. Good morning. Welcome to the yurt, man. Welcome
How,
to the
how are
circular
you?
city.
You're still in the yurt. It's
I'm going
much.
to stay in the yurt. The yurt is so much more comfortable than the
It
garage.
looks
I
it
mean,
looks more
yesterday I
fun.
went to the store and I came home at 8 o'clock, 7:50 something, and it was 98 degrees according to the sign on the thing. At 8 o'clock at night when you're hugging 100.
Yeah.
I mean, that means that I'm glad I didn't go outside yesterday. I wasn't working yesterday. So um, if you're, if you're in that parking lot and it's 100 degrees, it's 105 to 110 because of the cement just radiating the heat and the cars staying on. And I think gasoline is so inexpensive now in the United States, Nick, that people are leaving their SUV running when they go shopping, so the air conditioning stays on, so their car is in a furnace when they get out. But
Wow.
that means that the people who work in the parking lot get a little extra radiant heat.
Oh, man.
Anyway,
Ah,
but I wasn't working yesterday. I
good.
was astonished at 8 o'clock, 98 degrees.
Wow.
Because
Well,
you get to a certain, I remember from Houston that was the case, that if it gets to a certain point, the macadam, the pavement in Houston holds the heat overnight. It never cools down because the city is all roads. It's
yeah.
anyway. Enough whining here. I hope it's. Listen, you've got your.
This is my my rugby shirts. My rugby
Yeah,
Wales
that doesn't
rugby.
look that.
We
That's not the cool weather rugby shirt. That looks like a winter rugby shirt, man.
Well, after it's a winter game. So we've just finished playing a tour in Japan, and we won a game. So after more than 2 years, we've won a game. So
Yeah, when you got to travel all the way to Japan to win in your native sport,
yeah.
these are
It's
hard times, man.
but then when we start winning again, it'll be all the sweeter.
All right. Phew.
Anyway, what are we doing here, John? We're celebrating someone's birthday.
That's
We're,
right. It's this. This is our celebration. We're coming right up to it. We've only got
yeah,
we're counting down here. We've only got
yeah.
four left here until the birthday, or yeah, four,
Cool.
three in the birthday. So what we're doing here is Rowling is turning 60 years old, which Nick and I, as Nipponophiles here, we know that in Japan it's a very big deal because in the Chinese astrological system, they have the 12 animals, and each of the 12 animals have their 5 element representations. And so a full cycle is 60 animals with their, and Rowling was born in 1965, which is the year of wood snake. And as you come all the way around again to 2025, Arabaladic, we get the wood snake again. She's entering into her second life. It's a rebirth. It's a chance for her to explore all those things she didn't do before, as a conscious person, as a fully realized person, having gone through that cycle. So in celebration of that, we've been doing a review of all of her works. And after we got through all the works, we've been doing some of the golden threads of what she does. And we've done it in terms of this lake and shed metaphor, where the lake and shed metaphor is her description of her writing process. The lake is her unconscious mind and how it gives her inspiration. What is the foundation of the story? And that comes from all the books that she's read. It comes from her key events in her life and experiences, her education, her key relationships, and the unresolved issues from crises in her life. Those are the things that bubble up with story ideas inside her. She takes those things into the shed. Probably a shed that's, a little better appointed than my yurt, but it is probably not as theologically correct as my yurt is. We're in a dormant stage right now. Usually you come out here and you have a fire and the thing. And we're not lighting many fires right now in Oklahoma because the fire department, when they see smoke, they don't assume that everybody's gathered around the campfire to stay warm. Anyway, but in the shed is where she does her intentional artistry, where she adds all of the the golden thread plot points and elements in the story that she always puts in there, but specifically that she uses the tools, the traditional tools, the literary alchemy, the ring composition, the depictive psychology or psychomachia, the narrative misdirection, all these things that make a Rowling story the big twist, all those things that make a Rowling story, she puts in there. And that's a wow. So you have these great things. And she's saying, to understand my work, you have to understand the lake inspiration, which is often is not as fairly transparent. You're talking about bad dad and stuff like that. Okay, I get the bad dad thing. And then you have to understand the artistry. Well, I've been doing the artistry side. I've been inside my shed here for a long time, and I've been doing that work. The tools, the golden threads, the major themes, and by a wonderful providence, you entered my life, Nick, just about the same time that Rowling was talking about her lake and her shed. And as you can tell from your backdrop there, you're the lake guy. You're the guy that talks about that. You live in United States terms. You live right next door to where she grew up. I know for you, it's a short flight or something, but I mean that's anyway. And so we've been enjoying this celebration of her life and her work for people that the serious readers of Rowling stuff that don't just do don't read something like Troubled Blood on the Beach and close it and say, well, that was neat, on to the next thing. This is a book, her books as a rule require multiple revisits. And so where are we at in terms of we're down to the last 4 days, and
yes.
we're doing basically reader response time, aren't we?
Today I think we're doing feminism.
Oh, please. No, we've got a better suggestion. 2 old men talking about feminism. I mean, I can feel the noose tightening around my neck.
I'm feeling like I was coming into this, I was feeling a little like a guest at one of Strike's Valentine's dinner parties, thinking this is not going to end well in the comments.
No, and we've got some good we've got some great suggestions.
Yeah.
So I mean, the one that we jumped on was the guest who said, can you do Beetle the Bard? And I was like, oh yeah, that's great. And if you do Beetle the Bard, you can do Fantastic Beasts, the textbook, not the the original screenplay. But the actual textbook that Rowling wrote, is entirely.
So we're back on books. At least for the next 2 episodes, we're back on books.
Right, but then we had another comment that was about golden threads. Let's do some more golden threads, and another one saying they wanted to know more about exploration of the Gloria Conti thing, and so we got 4 things ready here for the birthday item. Woo!
I think I suggested to one of the commentators, maybe we need to start thinking about a season 2, but maybe a bit early for that. Maybe for her 70th birthday. Okay, so when we do a book, the first thing I like to do is to put us back into a period of time so we understand what is happening in J.K. Rowling's life as the book is published. So if we're doing the textbook, Fantastic Beasts and Where to Find Them.
Oh, Fantastic Beasts first. Okay.
Yeah.
I've got a lot of those, Nick. I have 4 different editions of that.
Now you're going to make me, if you got the first edition, you're going to make me very jealous because I didn't manage to get hold of a copy in time. There it is. So all those jokes and graffiti, I don't know them. I've never seen them.
My gosh, you're right. They're not in the.
No.
Why did they take those?
Yeah.
out?
Yeah.
Oh, there's one note. I think it says werewolves aren't all bad. Aren't all bad is written in. There's some, just not nearly as many. So why would they take those out? That was the cutest thing, man.
Yeah, the edition I've got has got none of those notes by the characters at all.
Oh, that's such a shame.
Yeah.
Oh well. Well, I have a copy, Nick.
So that is the one that is the original. So that was published in March 2001. So old time members of the fandom will recognize that as being right in the middle of the 3-year summer between Goblet of Fire and Order of the Phoenix. So what's happening? Rowling has offered to return her advance to both Bloomsbury and Scholastic.
Oh,
And
wow, that must have been a wonderful meeting.
oh, yeah. And surprisingly, both publishers are really keen that she keeps it and takes her time. No worries over here. Even at the point of publishing, so her plans for the year is she's going to marry Neil Murray in July. She's going to go to the Galapagos Islands to do it. Unfortunately, this was leaked to the press. They were hiring boats to go out to the Galapagos Islands with long lens cameras to get the scoop on the wedding. Wedding was delayed, as we now know. They changed where they were going for holiday. So they nixed the Galapagos Islands and they went to Mauritius instead. And they still got photographs of Jessica with a long lens. J.K. Rowling sued the magazine that took the photos.
That happened.
Yeah. So there's a lot going on. But I find it interesting that they were planning to get married in the Galapagos Islands. That creature-rich environment. It's where Darwin was traveling when he first started thinking about origin of the species. Its wildlife is notoriously varied. Also interesting that it happened in that long 3-year summer. There must have been some really, really gentle pressure from the publishers to do something. Anything.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah. As we know, it was brought out to benefit a charity. So the charity was called Comic Relief. So this and Quidditch Through the Ages were published on. In the UK, we have a charity day for Comic Relief. It's called Red Nose Day. It's a television spectacle. All the comics come and do little skits. It's quite common in workplaces that we'll do something silly and carry around the bucket to raise money. And J.K. Rowling wrote these books. I find it amazing, actually, looking at the press reports of the time. For that first edition, at least in the UK, 80% of that cover price goes to the charity. 80%. Not the writer's royalties. Almost everything but the paper and the ink goes to the charity. So those publishers that were saying, give us something, anything, just to keep interest in the series, the publishers were willing to say, okay, we'll do it for free. We'll distribute it, we'll edit it, we'll do all the graphics for you, we'll do it all for free. Let's just get something out. It was, it wasn't the publishing phenomenon that the next volume of Harry Potter would be. But this is a charity that was for each of their annual events was bringing in the region of £50 million. This book and its companion brought in £70
million.
Yeah.
That's...
Yes. I mean, adjust for inflation. That's a big deal for a small country like the UK.
That's a big deal. I mean, it takes me like 10 weeks to make that much money. And she did it like that.
Well, these two books brought in 17 million. So it was by far the biggest activity for that year's Comic Relief. Off the back of that, J.K. Rowling actually became a member of the board of that charity. It's quite common for a celebrity to do that, and she took her role on the board for, I think, 5 years after that 2001 release. The copy that you were lucky to pick up, that first edition, has got the doodles in there from Harry, Ron, and Hermione. Harry and Ron, I think, share the book as part of the conceit because his fell apart. There's some nice little notes in there. Going back to the plot points for the books that have been released up to that point, so the Acromantula, and actually that note about the Acromantula that's in there is the first positive proof we've got that Hogwarts is in Scotland.
Okay. And we have this special foreword from Albus Dumbledore too. It's a little bit like what we're going to see in Beetle the Bard. But it's mostly about comic relief, really.
Yeah, no, there was for the second edition. The second edition was brought out in concert with the film release. That has got an updated introduction, and it's got also a comment in there from Newt Scamander explaining what he was doing in New York. And some of the work he was doing for Dumbledore.
Is that this one, or is it this one?
Now mine is electronic, but I think it's yeah. I think mine had an orange cover when I bought it, but it's green now with a different design on the front.
Well, this one is pink to brown.
Yeah.
And this one is a soft orange.
Yeah. So I think soft orange was the cover when I purchased it.
Okay. Now it is interesting because the one I have, the one that you're envious of.
Yeah.
This is the Scholastic edition.
Yeah. And
this is from, well, it's in pounds. So yeah. It says Obscurest Books in Association with Bloomsbury. So I think these must just be the UK editions, US and UK editions, and then this was the much more expensive hardcover. Yeah, came out when the movie came out. This one doesn't have any notes in it.
No.
I guess just to show how humorless she had become about the subject by the time she
but you do get extra monsters in that one. So the extra monsters that were introduced in the film were added to that one. So it is you get the Hide Behind, the Hodag, the Horned Serpent, the Snallygaster, the Thunderbird, and the Wampus Cat.
It looks bigger. It is bigger.
Yeah. So there's 75 in the original edition. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and the second edition adds another 6. In Newt Scamander's introduction to that edition, he explains why they weren't in the original one. He said he was requested by Makusa not to draw attention to the American creatures in case it introduced some sightseers.
I love it. This one does have a few notes in it. It says the foreword says to appear only in For Wizards version. It's handwritten over the thing, and an editor's note for Muggle editor, usual guff. Obvious fiction, all good fun, nothing to worry about. Hope you enjoy it. Yeah, this is great. Anyway, so those are the standards. So you have the original US and UK books, and then you have the movie, exploitation fan servicing version.
Yeah.
And this was how much more expensive is this? Oh yeah, I mean the original was $3.99.
Yeah.
And this one is $13.
Yes. So I'm willing to bet that the publishers and the printers and the distributors weren't quite so generous to the charity on that one. And also the profits are split between Comic Relief and Lumos.
That's the final edition that I have here. And that is one I got at the library book sale here in Oklahoma City, which if anybody, if you're a real librophile or bookphile, whatever you want to call it, the place to live in the United States is Oklahoma City, because we have our annual book sale where they pretty much give away books, hundreds of thousands of books for nothing. And I got this edition there. Is that showing up, Nick?
That's showing, yeah. So that's the illustrated edition.
This is the illustrated edition.
Wow.
And it sells at $35. $35. And there are no notes, no handwritten notes inside here. But every picture, every character, like I want to talk about the living shroud or the Lethifold.
Yeah.
You get some magnificent things. The longest part of the Lethifold is a manuscript that describes somebody in the 18th century that survives that. But you can see the manticore that we see later in the films. Anyway, I don't know if that's showing up at all.
That's showing up fine now.
This camera. Anyway, it's this is a treat. The grandchildren love this one much more than they like. They don't get the little handwritten notes. That's not a big deal to them. Anyway, that's a thrill. So that's what are we going to talk? I mean, it doesn't really have a plot, Nick. It doesn't really have This is the reason we didn't include this in the first run through the books is because, as you said, it's more like story notes than it is a story. So it's this is something that she put. This is like supposedly she has shoe boxes and boxes filled with notebooks that have all her stuff. And this was her fun version of that, much like Quidditch Through the Ages. That another book within the book that or Hogwarts of History. But here we actually get to read that book and see it, and it was appropriate for the cause it was raising money for. It's very funny, especially if you got the American edition that has all of the notes in it. Now that. But there is, Rowling did do an interview when early in 2022. I don't know when they filmed it. It must have been in 2021, right?
So this was I do know because this was filmed in conjunction with the Natural History Museum. So there was a big exhibition. The Fantastic Beasts and the Natural History Museum were going to do an exhibition on mythological creatures, J.K. Rowling's Fantastic Beasts, and creatures in the real world to draw comparisons between the three. Now,
did you go, Nick? Did you go?
I didn't go.
Too far away.
Well, unfortunately, it was open for a day before the COVID lockdown occurred, so that dates. Are
you kidding?
So that dates it to 2020. Now, as the lockdown was released, it sort of reopened again, but people were still quite nervous about traveling and.
So only government ministers could go to it.
And only if there was a work-related drinks party.
Oh, I hope I live long enough for the histories of the COVID hysteria to come out, and those of us who lived through it and couldn't believe it while it was happening. I know this it's actually more outrageous than what we were privileged to understand. Anyway, I'm sorry you didn't get to see it, but that it was the occasion for this interview, and it was. Yeah. I've included it in my top 10 interviews, which really stunned me. I mean, the Rowling Library put up a copy of the interview on their YouTube station, and I'm going to link to that and my commentary on it at the time, in below this video. I hope people are actually looking at those links. It takes me longer to get those links set up than it does to prepare for these things. Anyway, I'm going to talk about this conversation that she had with Stephen Fry in 2022. It was aired on the BBC. Our good friends at the Rowling Library posted those things. She shared her thoughts about two mythological creatures about two of her own imaginative invention, and to say repeatedly that this subject is important to her because in it one can learn why we write stories. That's a quote. Why we write stories, even what it means to be human. Now, if you've been hearing me go off about writing about writing and this and that, and that's really because man is a storytelling animal. Believe me, I did a backflip when she said this inside this interview, because I was like, confirmation. The woman thinks a lot about these subjects, and obviously it's included in her work. It's easy to overlook this conversation. It's important, and it's important for grasping Rowling's beliefs about writing and about the essence of being human. I certainly did when I first watched the video. Today, I'm going to share the transcript from it because her part in it is pretty brief. And I'm going to share some thoughts about what she meant by that, what I think she meant by that, especially about the Lethifold, which make no appearance in the Fantastic Beasts film. I mean, I was a little disappointed she didn't talk about the demi-guys, because she said other places in interviews that the demi-guys was her favorite character. Yeah. I think it may be because the demi-guys can see the future, that the demi-guys is the embedded author, because the embedded author can see, it stands above the story and say, well, we can go this way or we can go this way. Anyway, here's what Rowling said to Stephen Fry. And remember, Stephen Fry, public atheist, bit of a goof, really pedestrian ideas about God and justice and this kind of thing. But he's also, I think, been obliged by contract with Bloomsbury or something, or with Warner Brothers, because he made a lot of money, I'm sure, out of his audiobook editions of Harry Potter. And so, but in 2021, Rowling is at the absolute nadir of her popularity. She's almost radioactive in the UK and the US, because she dared to say that, men are men and women are women. Well, Fry, in the interview, if you see it, he's sitting back the whole time, like, don't get too close. I'm not wearing, a lead suit here, and your radioactivity might sterilize me. But anyway, just remember that context is that, the discomfort in the room is because Rowling is a truth teller. All right, so here she is talking about this. She says, I think about this a lot, that we're storytelling creatures, because to our knowledge, we are the only animal that does this. And obviously, it was an attempt, certainly with respect to myth and folklore, it was an attempt to explain the natural world, things that people didn't understand. She's talking about why people invent mythological creatures. I am very interested in story, inevitably. I'm not just interested in writing stories, but I am interested in why we write stories. I'm even more fascinated by the fact that discrete cultures that have never met created such similar archetypes and such similar creatures. So we see the firebird, the phoenix as I called it, but you see the version of a firebird throughout different cultures. And what is that telling us about what it means to be human? What lives in the back of our minds, in our subconscious? This is very Jungian, right? We often see this, magical beasts. That magical beasts have been imagined by, after all, people who are living among different real animals. We're talking about cultures across different continents. That fascinates me because that's telling us clearly about ourselves. Boy, Nick, the lake thing should have been about her mythology thing here. Anyway, mermaids. It's very interesting because where did that myth come from? Even in Africa, these inland countries, of course, have great rivers. There's a form of mermaid, the Zhengu. So again, this is something that has been created across these different cultures. Why were British sailors imagining fish-tailed women when people in Africa were imagining fish-tailed women? It's just extraordinary. I think it would be exceptionally difficult to create a fantastic beast without any model in nature. She was asked about that. I created a creature in the original Fantastic Beasts, the Lethifold, that was my worst nightmare. There I went for something that would scare the bejesus out of me. Yeah, I'm going to talk about that. Although I was taking the idea from a cloak, when I stood back and looked at what I'd invented, well, that's just a manta ray. where Fry jumps in and says, manta means cloak. The Latinist, right? Anyway, exactly. So I've invented the manta ray who doesn't live in water. The Niffler is a bit of a favorite of mine. It's a treasure seeker, likes everything that glitters so it can locate treasure for you. So for those of you who don't know, the Niffler is a curious creature who is, I don't know, a cross between a magpie in nature and a duck-billed platypus in appearance. And a mole, exactly. They used a platypus to get the snout-like appearance in the movie, which I adore. I mean, they ran these things past me, and I just loved it. It gave it such an endearing appearance. So it's exceptionally difficult to invent something, and often nature got there far better. Excuse me. Because if you look at some of nature's extraordinary creations and you think, CGI will never match this. Certainly she'd gone to the Galapagos Islands. Yeah, she was seeing some of those. I was thinking about the creatures because I knew we were going to sit down and talk about this. And I realized that half those books, sorry about the Harry Potter novels, half those books just fold without those magical creatures. They're so important. Hedwig the Owl, and then we move through the Thestrals and dragons. They're key plot points, and obviously thematically they work in terms of life and death and power, struggle and treasure. But I realized when I focused on those creatures just how important they were. And that shows that we have a deep need to be connected to the animal world. All right, so that's everything she said in that interview. I mean, if you fell asleep during that, I'm sorry, but I mean, there's so much there. I'm going to start off with that last bit, okay? About how the stories fold without the magical creatures. And those were Rowling's last comments on the program. Excuse me. Those are the last comments on the program, but rhetorically, they should be first. She says that she prepared for the conversation with Fry. What I'm saying here is not off the cuff, but my considered and deliberate remarks about imaginary creatures. You know, she didn't say that exactly. She then says her Hogwarts adventures fold without these magical creatures, which is to say they are essential to what she's after in her stories in terms of life and death and power, struggle and treasure. But most importantly, because they somehow show that we have a deep need to be connected to the animal world. Now, what she's saying first there, she's highlighting the importance of what she's saying and how seriously she holds these views. Right? I think about this a lot, that we're storytelling creatures, because to our knowledge, we're the only animal that does this. I'm very interested in story, inevitably. You know, here I am, I'm J.K. Rowling. I'm not just interested in writing stories, but I am interested in why we write stories. Right? Now, she pledges, in effect, here to share what it means to be human, what lives in the back of our mind and our subconscious, the meaning of life and of story. And it doesn't get any richer than that in terms of stuff that she said publicly. I mean, that's outside of maybe the Dutch interview after Deathly Hallows and stuff where she talked about the soul. I mean, this is about as right on target as Rowling gets. She knew, too, that she's speaking to Stephen Fry, who, as I've said, is a public humanist flag waver, you know, who hasn't read even an introductory theological textbooks chapter on theodicy. And I'll include a link to that in the post below here. Rowling waves a hand at the commonplace views of mythology and folklore, namely that they were an attempt to explain the natural world, things that couldn't understand. But her description of the view as obvious and certain, I think, is only an acknowledgement that these are Fry's humanist views of primitive peoples straight out of the 19th century that are still pervasive and unexamined and taught in schools rather than true. Everything that follows in her remarks shows that this bad science done by clueless and superstitious cultures, nonsense, is not her opinion of mythology. For that, I think you've got to read Eliade's Sacred and the Profane and de Santillana's Hamlet's Mill for much more on that. But Rowling is making her remarks about the meaning of mythological and her own imaginative creatures to a person obviously and certainly incapable of grasping what she is saying. She's kind to him, to Fry, but her choices of mythical beasts and of examples from her own menagerie show that she is speaking right past him to more thoughtful listeners, maybe even to her critical biographer. You know. Anyway, the mythological creatures. Rowling denies the bad science truism that supposedly explained mythology right from the gate by noting that mythological creatures of remarkable similarity appear across cultures that are discrete and which have no contact with others. This speaks, she contends, with the whole Jungian school of psychology, to there being an archetypal foundation to these creations of imagination, a universal and common to all human beings as such root to the image used in the story. Her assertion that the universality of mythic creatures, specifically the firebird and mermaid, speak to the existence of archetypes. Now that's actually Greek religious language, and it's certainly a signature of Jungian psychology. Now, she talks about the archetypes, what lives in the back of our minds and our subconscious, telling us clearly about ourselves. That's her answer in brief to the question she posed at the start. Why do we tell stories? She claims to have thought a lot about this, and her choice of illustrations for her point suggests that she has. She begins with the firebird, which she says is the origin of the phoenix in her Potter novels and the Beast screenplays. The Thunderbird that she steals. This may be as close as we're going to come to an apology or explanation of her misappropriation of the First Nations Thunderbird in her first Beast film. The phoenix across cultures, and certainly in Christian tradition, is the representative image, incarnation, or icon of resurrection, victory over death. The mythical bird dies in its flames and is born again from its own ashes. This is the mythic representation of that thing, Nick, that she's got written on her wrist. The alchemical formula, saw away at coagula. Okay, she's got that tattooed on her writing hand as a marker that this is what she is about. It is, of course, also a token and a symbol of Christ and being the resurrection bird. Okay, the mermaid, the subliminal feminine, water being a universal symbol of the spirit and the noetic mind, has warnings in it about the dangers of engaging with this reality, and simultaneously an invitation to pursue and meet it as a means to transcendence. Now, Peters Groves has done some wonderful work on this and how this works in Cormoran Strike, and I'll include a link to that piece. It's called Liminal Women, Mermaids and Swan Maidens in Galbraith Strike's novels. But chosen deliberately as objects for our reflections, and the examples that Rowling thought best illustrate her points, these mythic creatures both speak to archetypal, superlunarary reality that forms the logos backdrop of human consciousness and created existence. Coming to terms with it in story is an important way to realize what it means to be human, and answers the questions consequently of why we tell stories. Not to mention why the Logos incarnate, truth himself, chose to teach almost exclusively in parables, in stories. All right. Now, to me, the most fascinating stuff, that I included this in my thesis, a big part of my thesis, was the beasts that she chooses to illustrate this that are of her invention, from her imagination. Her main point, or better, her surface argument with respect to mythological creatures, was that they were universal and archetypal. The assertion she makes with her own imaginary creatures is that they all derive directly or obliquely from real-world animals. The four instances that she chose are the Lethifold, looking like a manta ray, and the Niffler being a cross between a magpie and a duck-billed platypus. I think Rowling's point here, because of her conclusion that we have a deep need to be connected to the animal world, is that there is a connection between the human imagination and the inner essence of created things, their meaning or logos. We cannot create imaginary creatures that do not in some ways derive from the logos nature of created things, because per Coleridge and what Rowling said in her own Harvard address, imagination is logos made active within us and is the origin of human empathy and love. She asserts point blank that with respect to appearances, nature got there far better, because you look at some of nature's extraordinary creations, you think CGI will never match that. Using nature here, I think, as a euphemism more acceptable to humanist Fry than saying God. I do not think it's accidental that she uses the word bejesus here to make her point. I'll include a link down below for the etymology of bejesus. It's like begoras, all these what Scottish Irish euphemisms, but for saying by God. I don't think, and Nick, we'll have to talk to Beatrice or Patricia here, but I don't think the Presence has ever used that word before in an interview.
It doesn't spring to mind.
No, and it's pretty bizarre.
Yeah.
But why the Lethifold and the Niffler? I mean, for example, the Lethifold never appears in the Fantastic Beasts films that we know of. You know,
there was a lot of speculation in the trailer to the first Fantastic Beasts film, where we saw these sort of black shapes flowing across the city that we now know. Yeah, it was the Obscurus, but there was a lot of speculation that they were going to be the appearance of the Lethifold, because it was one of the beasts in the original Fantastic Beasts textbook that we never saw in the text.
Yeah, if they had the $35 edition, there is an illustration, and it's really small. It's let's say an oversized pancake. Anyway, Rowling's side point with respect to those two creatures may be to highlight, through the allegorical quality or iconicity of these creatures, the comedy of humanism and the rationality of Graham Greene's doubting his disbelief, a position in strong contrast with Fry's strident atheism. In brief, the Lethifold, which Rowling describes as her worst nightmare, is her fear of being consumed by the subliminal unconscious. Now, if you haven't read your Fantastic Beasts recently, if you haven't got a memorized knowledge of those 81 characters, this is pretty important here. First of all, it gets 5 X's, Nick. I don't know what percentage of the 81 Fantastic Beasts get a 5X, but it is the highest rating in the original edition. I've got the Scholastic original. It says that the 5X rating means that it's lethal to wizards, and there is no chance, there is no way to train it or domesticate it. It's deadly, and you can't become its friend. Now, she says that and this is any edition. The Lethifold, also known as the living shroud. Now that's like running grave, really. The living shroud. The shroud being the cloth put over a dead body, right? The Lethifold is a mercifully rare creature found solely in tropical climates. It resembles a black cloak, perhaps half an inch thick, thicker if it has recently killed and digested a victim, which glides along the ground at night. The earliest account we have of a Lethifold was written by the wizard Flavius Belby, who was fortunate enough to survive a Lethifold attack in 1782 while holidaying in Papua New Guinea. Now, the Patronus is the only spell known. I'm not going to read you all of Flavius Belby's thing, though. It's definitely worth reading. The Patronus is the only spell known to repel the Lethifold. Since it generally attacks the sleeping, though, its victims rarely have a chance to use any magic against it. Once its prey has been successfully suffocated, the Lethifold digests its food there and then in their bed. It then exits the house slightly thicker and fatter than before, leaving no trace of itself or its victims behind. And there's a couple of hilarious footnotes in this thing, and I'm not going to read to you, but and she does mention the green dragon, though, which I think is from Martin Chuzzlewit. Anyway, you'll have to read that and follow up on that yourself. But I mean, this is a terrifying creature. It gets you while you're asleep, and it eats you alive, and you just totally disappear. Now, to me, this is Rowling's worst nightmare, because her biggest fear is of being consumed by the subliminal unconscious, the substrate of dreams, and no longer existing as she is, but becoming a floating Lethifold creature, someone not at all conscious, but the sock puppet of personal psychological issues and unexamined habit of mind. Now, does that make sense, Nick? Is that this is a woman who's recovered her life through cognitive behavior therapy by examining her beliefs and becoming that much more conscious and deliberate about the things that she believes and how she acts and thinks. The Lethifold creature, okay, is a person who, again, is the sock puppet of personal psychological issues and unexamined habit of mind. Now, this is important for the lake and shed thing, Nick, because the lake is a lot of that unconscious mind bubbling it up, but then she takes it into her workshop, her shed, and intentionally crafts it. So it's not just, Joe's issues, Joe's wish fulfillment fantasies, but instead archetypal story that is transformative to everyone who enters it with their imagination, the primary imagination being the logos. Sleep is apt, whether understood literally, which is to say, whether a person is living in their unconscious wish fulfillment dream state, or metaphorically, a sleepwalker who lives an unexamined life. Rowling's personal and professional commitment to Solway and Coagula is her determination not to be prey for the Lethifold, her worst nightmare being that sock puppet of her circumstances and life crises, but someone instead who is self-aware, psychologically awake, not ideologically woke. Now, again, she throws this out to Stephen Fry right at the you can call it the peak or the valley of the trans wars. That is an absolute gold mine, Nick. That's basically her saying what her whole writing process is about, and what it means to be human is to be penetrating and to understand your own narratives and take conscious, intentional responsibility for those beliefs and actions. And if you read her Twitter feed, especially of the last 2 years, she is hammering those people that refused to step out of the groupthink about transgenderism and gender theory extremism, and to think for themselves about what is obviously common sense. Okay, the Niffler is the anthropomorphic representation of the materialist consumer who lives for the acquisition of the latest shiny object, humankind as a treasure seeker. It's funny, but I think the comic genius of this creature is how close to home it comes for all of us psychologically. He says the man in his little toy yurt here that I spent. I can't tell you how many years, really decades it took me to build this thing, Nick. This house of mine here. Anyway, the Niffler is important because we're all we live in a consumer culture. We're all materialists, whether we recognize it or not, and we laugh and enjoy the Niffler because we're seeing ourselves on the screen. Gotta have it, gotta have it, gotta have it. But the Lethifold is the scary one. As I said, it's really a Dementor-esque creature, one that can only be driven away by a Patronus. But the worst, this is a Dementor that only attacks when the victim is in bed or asleep.
Yeah.
Now you could say maybe that's because we're in bed. Maybe that's a euphemism for being consumed by thoughts of sex and stuff. But I think more it's just about our that's when we live in our unconscious state. And Rowling is saying her worst fear is living the unexamined life.
Yes.
Not thinking of herself, but being prisoner to her psychological issues, her key experiences, her relationships, that she's not transcending her accidental historical self. And the Lethifold is that on steroids.
Now that's really interesting, because I'd always sort of assumed that the Lethifold was a proto-Dementor, an idea that she hadn't formed fully yet. But actually she's kept them distinct. It's still, she hasn't been cut out of the textbook. It's still there. And there is that distinction between what is her pure analog for depression and this idea of the Lethifold.
I'm looking up the Dementor. The Dementor's not in here.
No.
Okay, that must be what is that
I'm
must
guessing,
be in the what that must be. I'm not remembering.
I'm guessing that zoologists don't categorize Dementors as beasts. because they take them
I'm looking up the thing,
yeah,
that in the, what is a beast is a large part of Newt's introduction. And yeah, clearly, it doesn't meet the definition.
Yeah.
So, but Rowling snuck it in there anyway with via that. But it's again it's not the depression, but it's your fears. It's so you have the Dementor, and then you have the Bogart.
Yeah.
Now, is the Bogart in the book? Is that a?
I don't think it is.
You don't think the Bogart's in here? I think the Bogart would have to be in here. And he's wrong. The Bogart is not in here. Okay. These are great exteriorization devices.
Yeah.
But yeah, the Dementor sucks the happiness out of you, and is, as you said, the embodiment of depression. The Lethifold instead is more like this, Socrates' revenge. That the unexamined life is not worth living. Is that you become this floating pancake that goes through life with no real dimension, right? She chooses something which is almost perfectly flat to show that your life doesn't have any vertical quality to it. I mean, no link with what is sacred. Okay. Everything is just it. That's right, and that's just your horizontal life, just moving from day to day to day. You may live in the present all the time because you're not thoughtful enough to think about your past or consider where your future is going to go. But the present is supposed to be, if you're truly present, is supposed to be your experience of what's eternal.
Yeah. Because
the eternal includes the past and the future. Now that Rowling, that's her nightmare. Yeah. Again, her worst fear isn't that she stays up at night and she has PTSD about being attacked in her bed, but that she will live a life that was basically her life before, she came to terms with the crises in her life. Yeah. Like, we don't know when she started this process, but we know it definitely, she got the help she needed when she came back from Portugal. And she got the tools that she needed to really deliberately take on that. And am I goofy for thinking that she's been in therapy for ages? She's just so into psychology that it's, that's part of.
We know she left CBT probably sooner than she was advised, much as Robin did, sooner than she was advised to do it. I wonder if that has triggered an interest in psychology, and she's just sort of self-analyzing and self-reading and
yeah. I mean, she was asked once what she would have done if the books didn't take off.
Yeah.
And she said, well, I was a teacher, I could do that, but she clearly was not really enamored of teaching. And she said that she would have been a psychologist. She would have somehow tried to study to be a counselor of some kind. And instead, she wound up being the truth teller to the world. I mean, a therapist of the world in terms of the books that she writes, where she has this depictive psychology where people get to experience the right side up soul and the transformation of the soul and the spirit. And then she speaks in her power phase, as you call it. She's been telling the world, here's how you need to think. And if you're not on board with this, all right, but you got to let me think the way I want to think. Anyway, I want to thank the guest that pushed us to do Beetle the Bard, because it meant that we could go back and do. Yeah, woo.
So I'm excited about that one. This is the book that was almost only going to be a myth. And you would have had to have spent $6 million, some crazy sum, to purchase it. I'm going to look forward to talking about that, John.
My edition only costs about half that, Nick.
Yeah.
Anyway,
look forward to talking to you tomorrow. Take care.